Feelings, man. How many of you have had some hard feelings this week? Maybe it didn't dominate your life, but you just had some hard feelings this week. We talked about this last week. I did some more reading and found that it's true that a feeling, an emotional experience, lasts about how long? 90 seconds. And some of them are sticky, right? Because what they do is we unite our feelings with a narrative and a belief, and then all of a sudden that becomes true and it sticks around long after the feeling has gone, because now there's this belief, there's this narrative that's in our mind that's connected to that feeling and kind of recycles it, brings it back to us. And those narratives really shape the world and the reality that we live in. Today I wanted to talk about this. You know, a lot of the time we encounter problems and we want to solve them and we can't solve them. A lot of the problems that we have on a daily basis, we can figure out solutions to them. And sometimes when we can't find solutions to them and we have a strong feeling, we can figure out how to turn our feeling. Have any of you had this where there's a situation, there's a person maybe that's really irritating you and they won't really go away, you can't change it, like you work with them or you volunteer with them or something, and you just kind of can't stand them until you figure out a way to think about them differently, right? You find a way to be like compassionate to them. You're like, oh, they don't have a lot of other people, or oh, this is really a core value for them, and that's why they are so annoying about it, right? And you can turn it, and you can kind of change how you feel about them or how you think about them, and you can find yourself now enjoying their presence or becoming more generous or more interested in them. They didn't change, you changed, right? The situation didn't change, but your perspective on it changed. But then there's some things where we can't change the circumstances and we can't change how we feel about it. And we don't want to. This is unjust. This is wrong. I'm not going to adjust to injustice. I am always going to think this is bad and terrible. And here it is. It's not going away. This situation is no good. And I can't make it any different, and I can't feel any different about it. At that point, you kind of have two choices, right? You have denial, pretending it isn't the way it is, and ultimately being miserable, or acceptance. And they talk about this concept as radical acceptance. How do we radically accept this just is how it is? Right? I was talking to some people the other day that went through a house fire, burned down their home, lost absolutely everything. And they spent a while not in acceptance about this and fighting with the insurance company and trying to make stuff happen and trying to make claims. It just wasn't working. And they were miserable. It was a horrible experience for them. And once they finally accepted, it's gone. We're not going to recoup any value. We're not going to get anything back. It's done. I am here. Then they could actually contemplate the future. They could start thinking about what would they do next. Think back to your own life about a time when you had to just accept a reality. It is what it is. I can't walk the same way I used to be able to. I need this kind of financial assistance now. I'm never going to see them again. And you found that you didn't want to accept it. You didn't want it to be true. I am not a pants size 38. Thank you very much. Right? I'm just going to keep forcing myself into the wrong size of shoes until finally I accept that those are never going to fit. And I can release them now. I can Marie Kondo that, you brought me joy and I don't need you anymore. Be on your way. We did a series a couple years ago on mindful self-compassion, which is a very similar set of ideas, right? I am experiencing this thing, this suffering, and every person experiences this thing. And so I can choose to have compassion for myself because this is just the thing that is. But how hard is it to accept that fact that this is not going to change? We don't want to, especially if it's unjust, especially if it's wrong. We don't want it to be true. Or think about your feelings. How many times have you said, but I don't want to feel this way? When this person acts this way, I don't want to feel anxious. I don't want to feel stirred up. I don't want to be so mad about this. Do you change your feeling just because you don't want to feel it? Does it go away just because you say, I shouldn't feel it? No. What?
In our little group discussion, everything was brought up. I don't mean to step on that person's comment, but it did turn my way of thinking. Was what I learned that I can't change, I prayed that I would change and accept that I can't change. And I never thought of it that way, and I thank that person for turning the light on for my stubborn way of thinking. And I appreciate that that was brought up for our little group discussion.
Sure, absolutely. Sounds like the serenity prayer to me, right? God, give me the strength to change the things I can, the courage to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? When things seem overwhelming, the thing I'm coming to, and the thing that Psalm 61 is pointing us to, because the psalmist is in a bad way. The psalmist is in a bad way, and they don't say anything about their circumstances, but the fact that they're pleading with God as a rock, as a refuge, as a strong tower means there's some threat that is constant, pervasive, terrifying. When we are in a way that feels overwhelming, we ask ourselves, what is over everything? What is bigger than everything else in my life? What is bigger than everything else in the world? What is the rock that is higher than I? And really, to be able to ask that question, we have to have some way of remembering what that feels like, what that is like, right? The stories that you have about grounding and trusting and feeling the strength of God are tools for us when we get to that place. Because sometimes it is not okay, and I'm still okay in it. Sometimes it's not okay, and I'm still okay in it. Now, we talked about the interventionist God, and I think that's such a critical part of thinking about the strength of God, because that ends up being the primary barrier to a lot of people imagining God being strong. Just as an aside, I did a 10-day study of the Holocaust in Berlin and Auschwitz, and also in New York. And then immediately afterwards, after we left Berlin, I went to Taizé, France, and stayed for a week in the community there. And every single day, so they do worship 3 times a day, and there's no preaching, but there's always scripture reading. And every single day for the entire week I was there, they read Psalms like Psalm 61. They read Psalms about God's protection, God's strength, God's defense, God's love of the people. And I was so mad every single day. I was also with like a bunch of like teenagers from across Europe who were really kind of there to party, which was a weird place to choose to party because they didn't give you a lot of food, and there wasn't really any like, that wasn't the vibe, but you know, they were like all having fun, and I'm like very dour, right? Like, genocide, everything's terrible, God damn it. And all these kids are trying to have fun.
And you were right. I mean, you just came from Auschwitz.
Right.
How else would you be?
Right. And what I found through that week was that there's this like declaration against the unjustness that's part of those Psalms. It's kind of like a big FU to the powers of the world to say, I will appeal to the rock that is higher than I am. You are a strong tower against my enemies. There was something in me that needed a big bird flipping right there in the midst of contemplating the violence and the degradation and the pain and the, I don't know, like the evil, right? Like, it's hard, I have a lot of complexity with that word, but I needed something strong in my body that could push back against that overwhelming feeling, that belief like you were talking about, that everything's terrible and everything's going wrong and nothing really matters. I needed something in my body. And I found by the end of that week that those Psalms had the ability to give me that strength to say, I mean, people say this now in the zeitgeist, not today, Satan, right? You've heard that before. Not today, Satan. That sense of like, I have something strong that I can claim, that I can push back on. And sometimes there's no evidence for it in the world. Sometimes the evidence in the world is exactly the opposite. And yet, somehow, we're proclaiming the sovereignty of God. Even this Psalm 61, you see this prayer about the king and about the God being faithful to the king. Well, that suggests historically that the Psalm was probably written before the exile, before they were conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And it probably was really about the king, but it stayed in the Psalter after the exile, when there never was a king again, when Israel never had sovereignty again, when that area was ruled by one empire and the next empire and the next empire. So why did they keep it? Because there was a sense of proclaiming God's sovereignty in the midst of the world's sovereignty that does something to us, right? If our president is the king, then whatever that person thinks or wants, that's what we end up being aligned with. That's the political reality. But if our king is God, in Christianity, we give Jesus the glory. We call him the Lord, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. Well, what does that mean? It means that we're saying, no, that's the truth. And it gives us a counterpoint to this that's happening here. Where are we going to align? What is our loyalty going to be to? And the Psalms maintain this sense because they know that we need to call out to that thing that is higher than us. And we are a people of the already and the not yet. Jesus regularly talked about the kingdom coming, the kingdom that is to be, and talked about the kingdom is here and now. The kingdom is inside you. Many of you will not taste death before you see the kingdom here. We are the people of the resurrection and the cross, the people of the kingdom coming and the people of the kingdom come. Because we know that reality of God's strength present now, and we also know that we need it. We know that we are actively awaiting God's intervention, and we are people who have and do feel the intervention of God. The thing is that if we're people where thinking fixes all of our problems, our creativity, our imagination, our intelligence fixes our problems, well, that works great until it doesn't. And if we are constantly relying on our own understanding to get us through everything, that will work great until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we will find ourselves totally bereft, totally undone, because we believed we had enough control, enough power to do it ourselves. We got to stop believing that earlier so that we're ready for when we need it. Because there are going to be times where it is not okay, and I still need to be okay in it. I still need to be me in it. I still need to be able to show up in it. And the psalmist is finding that they are getting access to this space in communal worship. That the commentaries I was reading were saying that this psalm may have been written by someone who is headed into the temple in order to get protection. That they're going to this place where the people are gathered to sing and to pray, to feel that strength and that protection of God. Maybe not literally within the temple as a means of being guarded your physical body, but a sense of being in the community to have your spiritual body and even your physical body protected and cared for. And think about what we do when we gather together in worship. We bring our own personal, individual needs, concerns, prayers to the collective. And what do we find often? The second we have something we need prayer for, we find two other people that need prayer for the exact same thing. We find the thing that isolates us most is actually the thing that connects us the most. The thing that seems like it's just our problem, just our issue, ends up being our issue, our challenge. See, sometimes I think we get so hyper-focused on our own particular faith. God save me, God protect me, God do things for me, which may be the beginning of our prayer life. We have needs, we have struggles, and it brings us to face with that which is bigger than us, that which we can't control. But sometimes we're not going to see it worked out in our life. Sometimes the thing doesn't move, and my feelings about it don't change. It just is. But when I'm in relationship with other people, sometimes that's the place where I see God at work. That's where I see transformation and liberation happen. That's where I see people coming out of addiction, people coming out of those dark places, being able to see something different in themselves or in others. And it gives me that hope that Ron was talking about. It gives me that vision. Well, maybe there's movement in my life too. I think there's something really important, really critical about coming together for worship, about praying together in worship, about coming together with those things that we can't accept them, but we have to. And saying this is that place of radical honesty together. The thing is that you're not yourself. Everybody's a group project. Every single person is not an autonomous individual. We are all collections of all the people, all the relationships, all the successes and failures, all the encounters we've had out there in the world. And so when we think about ourselves, we're already thinking about our relationships. We're already thinking about our heritage. We're already thinking about the network that's around us. Because we didn't get here on our own. Not a single one of us got here on our own. And so when we ask for the strength of God to be present in our lives, sometimes I know it can be a little intimidating, like, oh, I shouldn't pray for myself. I should pray for other people, but not me. Which can belie not a lack of trust in our worthiness, but also it belies this belief that somehow we're independent from everybody. Because what happens when you get healthier? What happens when you get stronger? What happens when you get kinder? What happens when you get more free? Everybody around you starts to feel it. It starts to affect your communities, your relationships, your families. It starts to affect the world that you live in. And the strength of God is present and available for you. Jesus taught us that we all are one people. We all have one ancestor, one lineage. We are one people. And none of us is alone. And we will feel the presence of God. And the presence of God will feel like safety. So where are we cultivating a sense that even though it's not okay out there, it's not okay right here, I'm still okay in the